When you originally built the Oculus Rift, you basically single-handedly reshaped how people thought about virtual reality. Like, where did that come from? Where'd your passion for that come from? Why'd you do that?
This forgotten tech could have changed history, but one guy brought it back. Watch this.
I was a PC gamer and I had about the best PC gaming setup that you could get. I had an AMD iInfinity rig with 6 monitors, and I was looking at it and thinking, what's the real future of this? Where is this all going? And it was very clear that the answer was not 8 monitors or 12 monitors. Like, it was going to be something radically different. And I became very convinced that the final media platform, not just the next one, but the final one, I wasn't sure if it'd be the next one or if it was ready, but I knew that in the end, virtual reality was going to be the dominant media platform.
How old were you when you were having this thought?
Like 14 or 15. So I built my first head-mounted display when I was 16. So I kind of got right onto it. My first stuff was really terrible. Like I can't act like I had immediate success. It took years and years of building things, taking apart older headsets from the 80s and 90s to learn what the engineers had been doing in those cases, and then applying a lot of modern technology to the way that things were being done. And what's weird about the Rift is it could have been built about 3 years, like literally every component that I used in the original Oculus Rift prototype, which I called PR6. It was the 6th major revision of my designs. Every single part in it existed 3 years prior, and most of them existed 4 years prior. So
That's very unusual, because I was gonna say, are you lucky you started just at the right time? But it sounds like just not enough people were actually working on this for.
Well, VR was a dead technology. It was this ghost town technology. It wasn't just like not cool, it was anti-cool. Every VR company in history had failed spectacularly. And so it wasn't getting attention. There wasn't anyone at the big tech corps that were looking at it. And I think that startups were not paying it enough attention as well. So the thing that was really interesting about Oculus is that when I started the company, it wasn't because I thought it was going to be a really great business. It was because I thought that it would be something that would be really important in the long run and a lot of fun to work on. And it ended up working out, which was really spectacular.
If every company before had failed, why did Oculus succeed? Timing, vision, or was it just about having the conviction to keep going? This is the same kind of thinking that has kept companies like Palantir ahead of the curve.
That's awesome. So do you think if there'd been more optimism and people were still trying things, someone else might have done this 2 years ahead of time, basically? Or 3
Oh,
years ahead of time?
absolutely. I mean, the really big innovation of the Rift was a pretty simple concept. Most head-mounted displays in the past had used complex, heavy, expensive optical stacks, so that you had a micro display of some kind, a heavy stack of glass, and then you have an undistorted image on one side, and out comes a beautiful image on the other end. But again, it weighs a lot. And think like 6 or 7 pounds for these big, giant helmets to have any decent image quality or field of view. And what the Rift did was say, wait a sec, we can correct for lots of lens aberrations in software in real time. Geometric distortion, we can do that in a shader on a graphics card. Chromatic aberration, we can correct for that in a shader on a graphics card.
Got it.
And so I was able to make a headset that only optimized around the things that could not be corrected in software. Things like the cost of the unit, the weight of the unit, and the field of view of the image. And so the Rift was designed as a very poor quality image, but you could use pre-distortion on the graphics card to basically generate an inversion of the distortion it created, so that even though it was optically a terrible system, it comes to your eye looking really nice. And this was not a new idea. People had come up with this at NASA literally in the 60s and 70s, but the computational power hadn't existed, and the idea was just forgotten. If people had said, I am going to build the best VR headset in the world, they would have probably done it exactly the same way I did. I don't think there was another path. And the fact that I, as a single teenager working in a 19-foot camper trailer, was able to come to this conclusion that now almost all the major VR companies have been ripping off, it shows that anyone could have done it if they had been more committed to the idea of making VR take off.
This is a textbook example of how innovation happens. When something is seen as a failure, most companies back away, but that's exactly where true visionaries step in. The real breakthroughs come from those who see potential where others see dead ends. That's why the most disruptive technologies often emerge from areas that were once considered impossible or unprofitable.
Are there a lot of things like that where we figured something out 40, 50, 60 years ago, but it wasn't possible then, and maybe we forgot to come back to it. Do you think that's a theme that we should be looking at more often?
I have a whole list on my computer of things that are this, basically forgotten technology, things that didn't work in the past and that are ripe for a comeback. And there's a lot of things like that. Like another example of this is ramjet engines. We don't have to get way deep into it, but ramjet engines are a type of jet engine that has no moving parts. They can be made incredibly cheaply out of basically stamped or spun steel.
And they go like Mach 5, right? Is this what I'm thinking of? Is a Mach 5 engine, or how fast are they?
Oh, that's the best part. The faster you go, the better they are, unlike most types of jet engines, because the faster you go, the more pressure they can develop and the higher your compression ratio of the engine is. So they actually start working. There are subsonic ramjets going back to World War II, but you really want to be going Mach 3, 4, 5, 6 for them to really come into their own and beat other engines. And until now, there's never been really aircraft that could survive that regime of flight. And so ramjets were just inefficient, impossible to start. The support equipment required to get them into the air and going fast enough was too heavy. But very recently, I think ramjets have come back into this world where we do have composites that can handle vehicles going that fast. We have secondary propulsion systems, like basically electric propulsion, that allow you to do things like, variable compressors that would allow you to use them from 0 speed and then switch over to full ram at high speed. This was actually what I was working on when I was at Facebook. I had a side project. Me and a few guys were in Atherton, and we got kicked out of Atherton because we were making so much noise. But we were building a project called ASRAM, the assisted ramjet. And it was a ramjet that could take off from 0 and then transition to full ram effect at supersonic speed. And our goal was to build a supersonic quadcopter. I ended up starting Anduril before we finished, but that's still.
You think Anduril might come back to Project ASRAM at some point?
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely ongoing, and like that's another good example, I think, of a technology where it was kind of a curiosity in the past, and it only made sense for very specific niche applications. I think in the future, ramjets are going to come back, and they're making a huge difference. I mean, they're really powerful, power-dense jet engines with no moving parts. Imagine what the maintenance is like on a thing with no moving parts.
How many revolutionary ideas have been left behind simply because the technology to support them didn't exist yet? Ramjets were once impractical, but now, with advanced materials and electric propulsion, they could change aviation entirely. The same principle applies to AI and data intelligence. How many game-changing ideas were shelved decades ago, only for companies like Palantir to resurrect them at the right time? The difference between failure and success is often just timing and persistence. Those who can recognize when the world is finally ready for an old idea are the ones who redefine the future.
It's gonna be a lot better way to build jets. Just to step back one more time to Oculus. Do you have any favorite war stories from that time? Like anything that surprised you or that was particularly difficult after you got going?
Oh man, there were so many things. I mean, I guess a negative one and a positive one. Like one thing that happened, and I like this war story because it flipped around in our favor right at the end. We were working with a game studio on an Oculus exclusive title. We were funding the development. We were putting tons of engineering resources into it. And then after we put millions of dollars, which was, remember, a big deal. You were an investor at the time.
Yes, that's a lot of money to spend on this sort of thing.
It was a lot of money. I mean, we were a 40-person company. We were like 45 people when the Facebook acquisition was announced. So like we were a pretty small company. This was a big bet for us. And we went to GDC in 2014. And on the first day of GDC, that same game developer that we had funded this whole title and done tons of work with them, they unexpectedly, literally like we had no warning at all, they show up on Sony's stage during the Sony keynote and announce that this game is coming out on PlayStation VR, which had just been announced about 5 minutes prior by Sony.
Wow.
And not only was it coming out on PS4, they were going to be giving demos of the game in the latest version of Unreal Engine, which we did not even know they were porting to because everything up to that point had been on Unity. And it was like, I was like, oh my God, we have gotten so screwed. And what was interesting is I think they thought they were screwing a little startup and that they could kind of do whatever they wanted. They were going to get away with it. And then the next day, we announced the Facebook acquisition. And it was a real roller coaster dynamic where you go through this power dynamic of like, oh, well, there's nothing you can do, nothing you guys can do. And then all of a sudden we get acquired by Facebook. It becomes clear that this was not maybe the best move on their part. And then it becomes, oh, whoa, I'm sure we'll figure something out. I always like that story because it shows how you can get screwed when you're a small company by bigger companies that you're working with. And one of the questions I always ask entrepreneurs when they're asking me about their companies is your company better as its own independent thing or as part of a bigger effort? And I always like to bring up that story as an example when they ask what I mean, because it's like, look, there are some things that if you're small, people are just gonna treat you poorly if they think they can get away with it. And there is a nice thing about being big, whether you're part of someone else's big thing or being big yourself. I mean, I've seen this so many times. The things that I'm able to do when there is a bigger company behind it is a lot. There's so many things you could never do when you're small.
This story is a perfect example of why vision alone isn't enough in the tech world. Oculus had a groundbreaking idea, but it was nearly steamrolled by the realities of business and competition. It wasn't until Facebook stepped in that the company had the resources and leverage to push VR into the mainstream. This is why strategy matters just as much as innovation. Having the best product means little if you don't have the right backing, infrastructure, or ability to scale. Palantir understood this from day one. It didn't wait for a corporate buyout or a lucky break. Instead, it positioned itself as a critical player in defense and intelligence, ensuring that it would be too valuable to ignore or displace. While other tech startups chased short-term trends and consumer markets, Palantir embedded itself within the most crucial decision-making institutions in the world. It wasn't about selling a product. It was about becoming indispensable to the very systems that run modern governance, security, and enterprise. The next wave of disruption won't just come from brilliant engineering. It will come from companies that know how to protect, scale, and integrate their technology into the fabric of industries that matter. Visionaries build the future, but the ones who survive are those who understand how to play the game.